Hello, welcome to the Ukrainian Studies Organization at Indiana University. I'm Natalia Shpylova-Said, and thank you so much for joining us today. Our speaker is Dr. Volodymyr Kulyk, and he presents the following talk today: Globalization and the Persistence of Russian in the Post-Soviet Realm, Ukraine in a Comparative Perspective. Dr. Volodymyr Kulyk is a head research fellow at the Institute of Political and Ethnic Studies in the Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. He has also taught at Columbia, Stanford and Yale Universities, Kyiv Mohyla Academy, and Ukrainian Catholic University, as well as had research fellowships at Harvard, Stanford, Woodrow Wilson Center, University College London, University of Alberta, to name but a few. His research field includes the politics of language, memory, and identity, as well as political and media discourse in contemporary Ukraine, on which he has widely published in Ukrainian and Western journals and collected volumes. His latest book is Movна polityka в bahatomovnykh країнах, Zakordonnyi dosvid та його prydatnist для України. In English language policies in multilingual countries, foreign experience and its relevance to Ukraine. The book is forthcoming in Ukrainian from the Ukrainian publisher Dukh and Litera in May 2021. As always, we will start with the lecture. Please submit your comments, questions via our Q&A option, which you can see at the bottom of the screen. All questions and comments will be addressed during our discussion. If you would like to ask your question, please let me know by putting a comment in the chat or in our Q&A box, and I'll promote you to the panelist status, and you will be able to join our discussion. At this point, I would like to welcome Dr. Volodymyr Kulyk. And again, thank you so much, Volodymyr, for joining us today and for presenting your talk for our Ukrainian Studies series.
Thank you, Natalia. Thank you for your presentation, and thank you for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be able to talk to a global audience, now not constrained by logistics considerations and possibilities. So I'll be talking about something I'm not doing much research on, but something I'm very interested in. It's an aspect of language politics. Language politics is my main scholarly preoccupation. I've been doing that for years, but this aspect is not very much researched in language politics of Ukraine or other post-Soviet states, but I believe it is very important. I gave this talk once 5 years ago at the University of Alberta in Edmonton, but now I take this opportunity to refresh my reflections on the impact of globalization on language processes in Ukraine and other post-Soviet states. I add new data. I take into account new developments in recent years in Ukraine as a result of the war and measures to counter the pernicious impact of the aggressor country. So this will be different from what I saw 5 years ago in some important aspects. I will now switch to my PowerPoint presentation and we'll begin. Okay, so let me get slideshow from beginning. Okay. Yeah, so let's start with this persistent of Russian part. How is Russian persistent first, and then why is Russian persistent? So when we look at the use of Russian in Ukraine and other post-Soviet countries, we realize that it is traditionally viewed as the legacy of the USSR. So this is something we inherited from the Soviet Union, and as the time goes, it should be gradually eroding. It is obvious, it is expected that new independent states will be promoting their titular languages, which in most cases have the status of state or official languages. Normally, the titular language is the only state language, and the state more or less actively or aggressively promotes this language, namely by inculcating the knowledge, encouraging or even enforcing the use of this language in various domains. And as the time goes, it should be logical to expect that this language will become more and more predominant in all domains, and more preferred by citizens and institutions in various domains. And so we are struck by the reality that it is not yet the case. And then the question arises, why? Mostly scholars tend to explain the persistence of Russian as a result of lenient policies of the host state. So they are not aggressive enough in promoting their titular languages, not banning Russian, not discriminating against Russian speakers, not forcing them to learn and use the titular languages, partly because it's globalization and international mobility age, but more importantly, because it's a democracy age. It's the age when international organizations watch what the states are doing, and especially in new states, weak states, such as most post-Soviet states are. And also Russia, as a kin state of Russian speakers, kind of assumed protector of Russian speakers in the post-Soviet states and beyond, pressures the other states to take care of its Russian speakers, not to discriminate them, give them all opportunities to use Russian in various domains. So it is assumed that Russian is primarily spoken by ethnic Russians, and also those titulars who were assimilated in the Soviet times. And in some cases, titulars will revert back to supposedly their native language, titular language, and the Russians might be gradually assimilated into the titular language or stay with their native language. In this perspective, current incentives to learn and use Russian are neglected. So all these incentives are supposedly derived from the Soviet times, when Russian was the main language of all social domains in the Soviet Union, when Russian was encouraged and sometimes forced upon citizens, including minority members. And it is obvious that that was the case in the Soviet Union, but it is less obvious to ordinary citizens and journalists and many pundits and even many scholars that there are strong incentives for people, including members of other ethnic groups than Russians, to use and learn and use Russian now. 3 decades from independence, these incentives do not seem to be weaker than in the early years of independence. Other than that, there is a factor of globalization as a mechanism of stimuli for international mobility, for the use of internationally current languages. And the role of globalization as a factor of usefulness of Russian is hardly recognized. So these are shortcomings that I will try to address and offer a new perspective on the persistence of Russia. So, but let's first demonstrate how persistent is it, first in Ukraine, then in some other post-Soviet states. So I'm using here data for surveys, nationwide representative surveys of Ukrainian population that I commissioned from the Kyiv International Institute of Sociology in 2012, 2014, and 2017, and for more expensive comparison to add 2006 data from an international project conducted. The survey was conducted by the Kyiv Center Hromadska Dumka. So if we look at data for 2006, 2012, 2014, and 2017, I grouped it not by year, but by language. So first you see 4 columns for Ukrainian, then 4 columns for Russian, and then 4 columns for both. Mind you, in both cases, the question was about the language of what language do you primarily use in everyday life? And the alternatives were not only Ukrainian, Russian, and both, but only Ukrainian, mostly Ukrainian, then about equally Ukrainian and Russian, then mostly Russian, and then only Russian. Yeah, but I grouped together to make it less cumbersome and more kind of illustrative. I grouped together mostly Ukrainian and only Ukrainian, mostly Russian and only Russian. So we have 3 options rather than 5. So what we see here, we see that the share of Ukrainian is gradually increasing, and especially it has been increasing between 2014 and 2017. So as a result of the war and the new, more aggressive language policies under the Poroshenko presidency, the use of Ukrainian has been increasing. The use of Russian first stagnated and then started decreasing in the last period, yeah, so after 2014. At the same time, we also see some increase in the use of both languages. So not only formerly Russian-speaking people started to use more Ukrainian, but they also switched from predominantly Russian to more or less equal use of the 2 languages. So let's keep in mind for this slide and the following slides that it is self-reported usage. So we take what people say they are doing. We do not measure their usage independently. And when they say something that they are doing, yeah, they do not necessarily report what they are actually doing. Sometimes they take into account what they believe is appropriate to do. And definitely after 2014, to use more Ukrainian became more appropriate. So some people might be switching from Russian to both, or from both to Ukrainian, not because they actually increase the use of Ukrainian, but because they change their mind about the right thing to do. So having said that, we can see that language use becomes much less widespread in terms of Ukrainian than language identification with Ukrainian as the native language. So if you look at these pairs of lines, yeah, so native and everyday language for 2006, then for 2012, and then for 2017, we see that in every couple of lines, the share of Ukrainian is much greater for native language than for everyday language. And the gap between the shares of Ukrainian became a bit narrower in 2012 and then grew back wider in 2017. If anything, the gap is now wider. So as people came to identify with Ukrainian as their native language, some of them came also to use more Russian in everyday, more Ukrainian in everyday life, but not all. Some of them identify now as Ukrainian speakers, as native speakers of Ukrainian, but they continue speaking primarily Russian in everyday life. So there is this discrepancy between their language identity and language practice, which contributes to the persistence of Russian in everyday life in various domains. Let's look at different domains. Here I compare languages of family, work, and internet usage. These are all the data from 2012. I do not have my own data for later years to compare the three domains, but I will use other data in the next slides. So for 2012, we see that Ukrainian is used more, of these three domains. Ukrainian is used most of all at home, less so at work, and much less so on the internet. In contrast, Russian is used more or less equally at home and at work, a bit more at work, but much more so on the internet. And also, if you look at both, again, at home, the least of combination of languages, more at work, which is kind of normally, because at work you have people with different language preferences, so they interact by using both languages, which are in Ukraine, as we all know, freely understood. So you can continue speaking Ukrainian with a Russian speaker, and he or she will understand you fully. But more so on the internet, people combine both languages as they do searches and they read the results. Yeah. So that's 2012. Let's look at later data. So these are data for 2020. Sorry, it's in Ukrainian. I only copied the slide. I didn't make it. So we see languages of social media, of home, the four columns: social media, home, work, or study, and native language. Yeah, we see that, and this for the whole of Ukraine, the left four columns, and then for West, Center, South, and East. Of course, we all know there are huge regional differences. In the West, it's almost 100% Ukrainian for all domains but social media. In the center, again, almost 90% of native language, more than 90%, and almost 90% for work, almost 80% for home. Again, much less social media. And in the South and the West, Ukrainian is a minority, but again, the same tendency: more at work, a bit less at home, and less in social media. And there is the same gap between native language and everyday language in any domain, and we see that this gap is more pronounced in the East and South. So people started identifying more with Ukrainian as their native language, but their change in language practice is lagging behind. More importantly is why people, even in regions such as the West and the Center, who are primarily using Ukrainian in all domains, continue using more Russian or both languages in the social media. So that's the question of its persistence. And we have identified now one important domain of the persistence of Russian, the media. And the relationship between work and home is different in this data for 2020 than in the previous data for 2012. Here we obviously saw that there is more Ukrainian at home than at work. And in 2020, we see that nationwide is clearly 63% versus 70%. There is more Ukrainian at work than at home. That can be a result either of this desirability effect or the effect of a real change in policies in the workplace. So as the state came to require more Ukrainian in various practices, many more people came to be using primarily Ukrainian in their workplace. Very last stage of this change is the coming to force of the requirement of the provision of the 2019 language law about the language of services. Yeah, now services are required to be used in primarily Ukrainian. So Ukrainian should be a default language. Whether or not this is the exact result of that, it's hard to say. So we need to do more research on that. But definitely, let's register this difference. So 8 years ago, it was more Ukrainian at home. So the switch to Ukrainian started at home, but people either did not want or did not have an opportunity to use more Ukrainian at work. In many workplaces, there was some pressure. There were little favorable condition for the use of Ukrainian. But now it's changed. Yeah. So let's summarize a bit. Who speaks Russian and where? So Russian is, or should I say was, because this difference in data between 2012 and 2014, you spoken at workplace more than at home. Maybe it's a thing of the past. Maybe now it's spoken at workplace at least as much. Ukrainian is spoken at least as much at workplace as at home. Many Ukrainian speakers used, or some maybe still use, Russian at work. What the reason for that can be different: the pressure from management, or preference of customers, or own choice of service providers, for example. They can believe, and there is evidence. There are different testimonies from different domains, such as shops, for example. Yeah, that. Sales girls, it was mostly female staff. Sales girls can be speaking Ukrainian among themselves and then addressing a customer in Russian. Not because of the immediate visible pressure. There was no manager involved, but there was maybe a belief that it's a more appropriate language, that the customer might be preferring Russian, might be expecting Russian. So no matter what their own language, they could think that it's more appropriate or more customary to address the customer in Russian. That might be changing, as I mentioned. But what is still true is that Russian is used, and here I do not add was, is used in various media more than at home. In particular, many Ukrainian speakers read and watch in Russian because of bigger supply. Obviously, the supply in Russian is always bigger. Similarly to how English is bigger than Russian on the internet and in the media industries and the cultural industries, similarly Russian is bigger than Ukrainian, and this fact will not change in the foreseeable future. Russia is larger, it's more affluent, its market is larger, so this will be the case for the years to come. Finally, we can identify differences between shares of languages in different types of the media. So the more globalized is the media type, the bigger share of Russian. So we can now see difference between newspapers, television, and the internet. Again, this is the old data for 2012, but I'll show more recent data in the following slides. So here we see that Ukrainian is more used in newspapers. Russian is primarily used on the internet, and television is characterized by the combination of the two. The red column for both is the highest, the tallest. Yeah. So now is the 2016 data by one user who examined hundreds of various websites and checked their languages. So his that was published in 2016. The study was done in 2016. That article was published in the Texty.org outlet, so I copied from there. So he distinguishes between the trade and services websites and entertaining media, pastime media websites. So for internet and banking and services, mobile phones and immobility, stuff like that. He showed that there is a big difference between different types of this media. For example, for mobile phones, all their websites have Ukrainian interface as a default option. For immobility, none of them have Ukrainian as a default option. But there is some share of Ukrainian, and it's either default or internet Ukrainian interface as an option exists. But it is only predominant in banking and mobile phones. In contrast, if we look at internet entertainment, we see almost complete dominance of Russian. Except for this media maidanchiki, media platforms, I don't exactly understand what he meant by that. But definitely not for music, not for movies, not for entertainment, not for video plays, not for restaurants and tourism. So that is primarily domain where Russian dominates, and where people choose Russian either because its supplies is bigger, or because they believe it's more pleasant, more preferable for them personally. Now let's come to social media again. 2020 data for different kinds of social media. And again, we see the heavy hegemony of Russia. If we look at the Russian social media of Kontakte and OK, so we see on the Classic, we see here almost 100%. But even if you look at TikTok and Facebook, still something like two-thirds to three-quarters, on Twitter more than three-quarters. Very heavy dominance of Russian. So again, media is the domain where Russian predominates. And in social media, people are free to choose. People are hardly forced by anybody, but people are constrained by what is available and guided, informed by what is considered appropriate. Yeah, and of course, the choice of their interlocutors also informs them and somehow more or less subtly pressures them. Is the reason the different proficiency in Ukrainian and Russian? Of course, if people still do not know Ukrainian well, then they will be using more Russian than Ukrainian. No, that's not the case. Even in 2012, we saw that almost equal proficiency in Ukrainian and Russian, a bit higher greater in Russian. And the asymmetry is due to the fact that Russian speakers still know or knew in 2012 at least knew Ukrainian much worse than Ukrainian speakers knew Russian. Yeah, so that was part of the inertia of the Soviet times, but the gap was closing, the gap was decreasing. As I compared data for different years, it was obvious, and by now there is no such gap. And even if you look at cohorts, we see that there are some differences, but not so huge. Younger people, younger than 45, know Ukrainian better than older people, somewhat, maybe considerably, yeah. But surprisingly, maybe, they also knew Russian better. So it's not the case that since they got their education primarily in Ukrainian, they would know Ukrainian better and Russian worse. No, they also know Russian better because they use it more actively, including on the internet. They are more actively consume various types of media where Russian continues to be used. So their knowledge is maybe grammatically written Russian is more of a problem to them, and sometimes we saw that on the social media, on internet fora, when they started to write, it's obvious that the written knowledge is deficient, but that doesn't necessarily affect their confidence in using the Russian language, and that doesn't necessarily affect their choice. They might still prefer Russian, even though they might be writing with terrible mistakes. Let's look at how people perceive what is important. In 2014, I asked a question: do you agree that for full-fledged повноцінне життя, full-fledged life in Ukraine, knowledge of Russian is no less important than knowledge of Ukrainian? And we see that more than 50% of all respondents, something like 55, said yes, Russian is no less important than Ukrainian. Among Ukrainian speakers, it was more than a quarter, and among Russian speakers, it was something like 80%. Yeah, so for whatever reason, for the lenient policies of the state, for the pressures of the market, for the inertia of perceptions, Russian is still no less important to Ukrainian than Ukrainian language. Even for Ukrainian speakers, if we add agree and yes and no, we will have more than 50%. Yeah, so they are aware of the fact that Russian is used around them and Russian is needed to them. Let's go beyond Ukraine. Let's see some data for other post-Soviet states, and I added Ukraine to have this comparative perspective. We have a share of native speakers. That's the data from I got from 2004. Of course, it's old, but I didn't have this comparative data for later years. So they reflect the latest census at the time. Yeah, so it might be in early 2000s, something like that. Yeah, so we have first column native speakers, and then three other columns: active knowledge, passive knowledge, no knowledge. It's responses to the question of whether they know Russian. Yeah, so these three last columns should add to 100%. So we see that only in Azerbaijan and Estonia, less than a half of the population have active knowledge, claimed active knowledge of Russian. And only in these two countries, a considerable, something like a quarter or a third in Azerbaijan has no knowledge, or at least says they don't. Yeah. In most other countries, 60 or 66 per 56% have active knowledge of Russian. If you look at some of these countries, we will find that active knowledge of Russian is still greater, more widespread than active knowledge of the titular languages in many states. Let's look at this data. So they are not as comparable. They are not as strict in table form, but I found data for different years for different countries. So we see, for example, in Latvia, and with its strict language policy, we have that Latvian is known as a second language by 21% of the population, and Russian is by 44%. So the high is twice as high. Of course, that second language prevalence depends on the prevalence of speakers. Yeah, so it can be a second language only to those for whom Russian is not the first language. Yeah, but if we add knowledge of Russian as the first language, as second language, we will have more than a half in Latvia. Yeah, so similar to what we saw in the previous slide. So in Lithuania, we definitely see that Russian is known better than English. 20 years after independence. Yeah, in Kazakhstan, we see that for all the population, Russian is almost universally known, and for younger people, not so much, but maybe that's underestimation. We don't know exactly. Yeah, what we do know about Kazakhstan is that 80% of users prefer non-Kazakhstani websites, mostly Russian. Yeah, and of 40 most popular websites, there were listed 15 Russian websites and only 5 Kazakh websites. And even in Uzbekistan, with much lower share of Russian speakers, we saw that at home in Tashkent, 29% of residents use Russian, and at work, Russian is much more popular, much more widespread than Uzbek. It's only for the capital, but that's the most dynamic part of the population. That's the most influential, affluent, and opinion-making part of the population who lives in the capital. Yeah. So let's look at 3 domains which affect, which contribute to the prevalence of Russian. We talked a lot about the media, so let's start with the media. In many former Soviet Union countries, Russian media and cultural products are more widespread and popular than local or Western ones. Russian and Russian language products have obvious production advantage because they can be consumed at both Russian and Ukrainian, or Russian and Kazakhstani, or Russian and Belarusian market. Yeah, consumer preferences. Many consumers still believe that Russian products are of higher quality than local ones. And of course, they believe that Russian products are of greater relevance than Western ones. This is changing, definitely changing in Ukraine since the war. Yeah, and that was obviously the case before the war, but now not to all Russian realities are still relevant. Russians used to be considered ours. Yeah, so our movies, our songs, our TV, it was definitely different from Western. Western was theirs, and Russian and Ukrainian was ours. Now, not so much. Maybe for some people, it still doesn't matter, какая разница, yeah? But for many people, there is a difference. There is a clear distinction that Russia is not us, that we do not see it as relevant. But belief in quality still persists among many. So it is very slowly changing. Maybe some would say inferiority complex, some would say that's an objective fact that Russians have more money, and they produce higher quality shows or video clips or TV programs or whatever. But definitely there is an overwhelming preference for consumption in the original language. People do not see the need to translate from Russian. Yeah, so if they understand Russian, so why not show Russian products in the original language? Definitely, and I had data for that. I will not show them, but definitely people are not ready to consume Russian products in translation. So there is a gradual, even vocal protest. There is one way which the state used to overcome the hegemony of Russian, namely TV and radio quotas. We know that they have been used in Ukraine since 2016, 2017. They have also been indirectly used in some other countries. But in Ukraine, and another no less powerful leverage has been the ban on Russian internet resources and social media, but it is due to exceptional situation. So Ukraine is at war with Russia. If it was not for the war, there would not have been that ban. That would be unacceptable to most of the population. So we only have that due to Russian aggression. Yeah. So as Russians say, "Не было бы счастья, да несчастье помогло." If we believe that Russian is несчастье, yeah. But if we believe that it's about the choice, and most people still believe that they should have freedom of choice, and so the state is limited in their ability to ban something or to impose something. Yeah, so attitudes even to the quotas are mixed. People believe that it's important to have more Ukrainian, but people also believe it is important to give them freedom of choice. So another domain, transnational tourism. We are not so much aware that the politics within our states are also influenced by what's happening beyond our states. Russians and Russian speakers are the most numerous groups of tourists in post-Soviet and some European countries. Not in Ukraine since 2014, but before that, definitely. Since post-Soviet people usually do not know English or do not know it well, do not know local languages, they have to be serviced in other languages, and normally in Russian. It's the best choice, the most economical choice. It's one language that covers all post-Soviets. Yeah, they can be serviced in that language, and they understand it, and they normally do not reject it. They do not insist on the use of other languages, if only because the most obvious alternative would be English, as they're not so fluent in English. Yeah, Russian is also used for servicing all post-Soviet tourists in many countries, and that means involving many non-Russian former Soviet Union personnel. So Ukrainians can be found in Turkey, in Egypt, and maybe in other countries, and they are addressing not only other post-Soviets in Russian, but also Ukrainians in Russian. Some Ukrainians definitely prefer that, especially given that tourism is for more affluent people, normally more likely than not for urban people, more likely than not for younger people, and these are categories where Russian is overrepresented. Yeah, locals in Turkey, in Egypt, in Montenegro, in other countries, invest in Russian proficiency. And then they see no need to add Ukrainian to their language repertoire. Having invested heavily into learning Russian, seeing that most Ukrainians understand Russian, they do not understand why they need Ukrainian. So they continue investing in Russian, they continue using Russian, for Ukrainians, for Kazakhs, for Belarusians and for Moldovans. I do not know exactly about the Balts. Maybe they're increasing proficiently in English. Made English the preferred choice for servicing them, but they are not numerous anyway on those markets. So the biggest groups of tourism in these countries are Russians and Ukrainians. Yeah. So we saw. As a result, we saw Russian in public signs, in menus, in guides, advertisements in print media. And we should take into account that services which are provided or intended for foreign tourists also benefit local Russian speakers. So if there is this menu in Russian in a restaurant for tourists, then it can be used also by local Russian speakers. If there is this guide, or if there is this public signs and so on. So Russian, even if intended for foreigners, can be used by locals as well. So there is one illustration. Tallinn 2015. We can compare languages on the left, languages of public signs. It's Estonian and English in smaller script, yeah. But on the right, it's a sign of houses for sale, and we definitely see English above Estonian and Russian above Estonian, and only then we see Estonian. Yeah, so Russian language is a commodity. Russian language can be used for these practices, and it is actively used even if people do not necessarily like Russian and Russians, but they understand that that's how they make their business. Yeah. So and the third and final domain I'd like to talk about is transnational migration. Migration includes permanent emigration and part-time residence. Russians buy property and live full or part-time in the Baltics, in Montenegro, in Cyprus, until 2014 also, Crimea, for example, yeah. Many Ukrainians living there or working there join Russian-speaking communities because they use the language they understand. And if Ukrainian is not available, Russian can do, yeah. church, media, and now you see all these social media groups addressing logistic problems, everyday problems, and also kind of everyday communication and hanging out. Ukrainians might feel uncomfortable, but for the want of Ukrainian groups, they're using Russian. Migrant workers, long-term workers or seasonal workers from post-Soviet countries. They're working in Russia or other parts of the former Soviet Union, where Russian is understood. Yeah, we all know that people from Central Asia or Caucasus in Ukraine are more likely than not to use Russian than Ukrainian. Yeah, and if they do not stay long, they do not see any need to invest in learning Ukrainian. Only if they decide to relocate permanently to Ukraine and maybe marry a local, then they would see it sensible to invest in Ukrainian. In 2014, Russia was the main destination for Ukrainian migrant workers. Since the war, the flow decreased, but by no means stopped. We still know that there are lots of, first there were flights, then there were trains, now there are buses. Yeah, so even if some means of communication with Russia were discontinued, there is still demand, so there is supply. So many people still consider it appropriate and desirable to work in Russia because it pays better. And the language is understood, and even if they do not obviously face discrimination, on harassment, and abuse, they consider it's appropriate. Yeah, even beyond Russia, the Russian is imposed on migrants in some countries like Western Europe, where Poland, Czech Republic, where employers can learn some Russian, or maybe still remember Russian from the communist times, but they can use it for migrants from all post-Soviet countries. And again, Ukrainians can use it also for informal communication with other post-Soviets. Definitely, Russian can be imposed on Ukrainians or on other post-Soviets. But in contrast to communication within Ukraine, where Ukrainians can expect Russian speakers to understand, Ukrainian speakers can expect Russian speakers to understand them, so they can refer to what Lada Belonyuk coined as non-reciprocal bilingualism. So people are speaking their respective languages without switching to the language of the interlocutor. Outside of Ukraine, this practice doesn't work, because Belarusians or Moldovans or whoever, or Russians cannot be expected to understand their Ukrainian. So for Ukrainian speakers, the only option would be to switch to Russian or to the local language, or maybe to English. But of these three, obviously, within these migrant communities from the former Soviet Union, Russian is the most widespread option. If we look at work as a part of the reason for people to migrate, either permanently or seasonally, we see the dynamics of production and consumption. Many jobs require Russian due to their transnational nature. It can be media, it can be tourism, it can be production and services that are part of a former Soviet Union corporation, for example, Russian or maybe Belarusian. It can be production, it can be programming services, it can be tourists, whatever. Yeah, definitely they are widespread. More often, Russian is preferred by owners, managers in Ukraine, for example, or chosen to accommodate targeted consumers within Ukraine, which can be urban needs, which can be more affluent people, younger people, the categories where Russian in some parts of the country definitely are overrepresented. Yes, if we are speaking about, for example, East and South, We have obvious divide between almost completely Russian-speaking urbanites and more or less Ukrainian-speaker villagers, but definitely the preferences of urbanites are imposed on the villagers rather than the other way around. If we are looking at globalized productions and services coming to the post-Soviet markets, definitely they use Russian in dealing with all Ukrainian consumers. We often see websites which use English and Russian, or maybe even Russian only, and it often takes a pressure, takes a boycott, takes a bad publicity campaign to force them to add Ukrainian. Some do that on their own will, but not many. Especially since the Maidan and the war, more Ukrainian speakers protest this predominance of Russian or exclusion of Ukrainians. They boycott some services, some networks, but people actively asserting their language preference are a minority in any country. Yeah, and definitely Ukrainian speakers normally accept what is given to them rather than fighting for their choice. So for that reason, the real change came with 2019 language law, especially its norm on the use of Ukrainian in services. So Ukrainian is now a default option. It's supposed to be a default option in services, even though the use of Russian or other languages is not prohibited. So if the customer prefers that language and service provider masters that language, so that communication can be in that language, either Russian or English or any other language. And two years after the coming into effect of that law, and a couple of months only after the coming into effect of the norm on the use of Ukrainian in service, we see visible changes, more Ukrainian in all domains, especially in public sector, but also in private services. Regional uneven, of course, where Ukrainian is a tiny minority language, as in the cities in the Donbass or Kharkiv, Odessa. You cannot expect too much Ukrainian, but definitely bigger networks establish a practice of adhering to the law, because it's becoming costly to violate the law. So they are adhering to the law. So they are using Ukrainian as a default option. They're investing in language knowledge of their personnel, especially that's not so much knowledge is needed to say a few words to the customer. So that is changing. In conclusion, although globalization is believed to be primarily about the spread of English, we should keep in mind that globalization not only stimulates acquisition and use of English, but also supports knowledge and use of regional lingua francas, of which Russian is one. Yeah? Due to inherited proficiency and tradition of use in the former Soviet Union, in Ukraine in particular, Russian has advantage over titular languages in market-regulated domains, unlike state-regulated domains where titular languages as state languages are more strictly required and more imposed. Globalization reinforces post-imperial advantage of Russian by stimulation the transnational flow of services and goods, which prioritize languages with greater numbers of speakers, either active or passive. So definitely Russian is one of such languages. We can also see the same for Spanish. We can also see the same for Hindi. For German in different parts of the world. But Russian is one of the big winners of these transnational flows. Ukraine is an extreme case in former Soviet Union. On the one hand, due to a large share and privileged position of Russian speakers, it was the largest group of Russian speakers outside of Russia. On the other hand, due to its war condition, because of the war, there are more active counter efforts. Yeah, so there is more aggressive policies of Ukrainization. there is this unique ban on Russian internet resources and social media, which cannot be copied, it cannot be adopted anywhere else, because that's problematic from the point of view of human rights. There would be pressure protest from Russia, and many countries would not want to mess with Russia. Ukraine can mess with Russia because Russia is messing is us by waging a war. So we are not constrained anymore by the need to take into account what Russia thinks what we should do, as we used to be. But that doesn't mean that we are free from that transnational dynamics that I described. So we need to keep in mind that whatever post-imperial evolution, there is another dynamics, globalization dynamics, which benefits Russia greatly. So Russian is there to stay, not only because there will be Soviet kind of bred people who prefer to use Russian, but also for many people it is very beneficial. It is very tempting. It is very important and rewarding to use Russian. So that's it. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Volodymyr. Do you mind stop sharing your screen? We have a couple of comments.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'll start with the comments that appeared in our chat. Well, first of all, greetings from Miroslava Znayenko. Hello, Volodya. And
Miroslava.
We have a couple of comments from Jeff. How many Ukrainians identify as native speakers of both Ukrainian and Russian?
Okay, I need my screen again because the answer is there. What's wrong? Oh, sorry. So I cannot. Just a moment. Okay. Sorry. Here, if we look at the lines for native 2006, native 2012, native 2017, you see something like 18 in 2017, something like, I believe 18% of people say their native languages are both Ukrainian and Russian.
Mm-hmm. So the next comment will be, when you say first language, do you mean the first language you learned in childhood or the primary language you use in aspects of your life?
Normally the latter. Yeah, I do not use the word first language much, precisely because of its implication as a first language learned as a child. And it is not that important for my purposes. So what I normally say is the main language of everyday life. Yeah, or the main language of particular domains, such main language at home, main language at work. Yeah, but I said about first and second language when I spoke about proficiencies. Yeah, so people can know language as their first language or know the language as their second language. So, and in this case, the first language is language learned as a child, and the second language added later, yeah, which can become the main language of their everyday life. So it's both.
Mm-hmm. If there is time, and we do have time, can you make a brief comment on comparison of the persistence of Polish in Western Ukraine?
Oh, there is nothing to compare. Definitely, there is no persistence of Polish in Western Ukraine. There are some pockets of active use of Polish. There is a rather tiny minority, and Polish was preserved retained partly due to Catholic beliefs. Catholic religion in some villages. There were some families of Poles in the cities such as Lviv, but very few. And there were, I believe, 2 schools which continued to be using Polish as the main language of instruction, even during the Soviet times, and they were preserved in the post-Soviet times. But that was incomparable with the scope of Russian, even in the Western Ukraine. So now Polish becomes more important. So first, and TV, which could be received in the territories of the Western Ukraine near the border with Poland, similarly to Hungarian Transcarpathia or Romanian in Bukovina, was also a factor of passive understanding of Polish. Some people were able to travel to Poland during the periods of early ages, for example, liberalization in Poland. So they could pick some Polish there as well. But mostly that became an important factor in language dynamics since post-Soviet times, when more and more Ukrainians went to Poland to work and study. And now, of course, it's millions of people. And so many people go there that definitely not only those who knew Polish already go there. Yeah, so many people who had no Polish come to Poland, use maybe Russian, or maybe in some cases even Ukrainian with their employers, but pick up Polish in the process. So they can, those who come back, some stay. Come back, those seasonal workers or students who come back to Ukraine for work. So they come with the knowledge of Polish. But within Ukraine, in interactions, in language preferences, in demands on language policy, it's not a factor at all.
Mm-hmm. And the next comment is a compliment. This is one of the best sociolinguistics talks on Slavic languages I've heard in a very long time, and I'm saying this as a sociolinguist.
Thank you.
And we have some more questions. The first one will be from Hiroki Kuromiya. Hi, Volodya. Thank you for your interesting talk. There is loud voice in Ukraine that the Russian language is a weapon of aggression. I have many Ukrainian friends whose mother tongue is Russian, but speak Ukrainian without any problem. Some of them, all of whom are Ukrainian patriots, insist that the Russian language should have a legitimate, though not dominant, status in Ukraine. Russia cannot claim a monopoly on the Russian language, just as England cannot on the English language. My Polish colleagues often disagree, saying that England doesn't claim political domination, whereas Russia still does. What do you think?
I agree with all the points, but I also agree so I also can say that there is an obvious contradiction between them. But I think that all these beliefs are present and prevalent in Ukrainian society. And all these beliefs is something that a scholar has to study, and a politician has to take into account when suggesting and implementing political policies, political decisions. So definitely Russian is not only the language of aggressor, but it is also that. At least many people believe that. And since many people believe that, the state cannot ignore that. Definitely Russia continues to use the Russian language as a means to affect Ukrainian, to make them believe what Russia says. Definitely Russian language is not the only language used for that. Many Russian bots use Ukrainian now, and they're even ridiculed because they make funny mistakes very often. Yeah, we all remember Nasinya Semenchenko because they use translate to translate their Russian into would-be Ukrainian. But definitely Russian is used much more for Russian propaganda. So many Ukrainians believe that we should limit the use of Russian to limit the impact of Russia. Definitely, this is not the predominant belief in Ukrainian society. More Ukrainians believe that, on the contrary, we should allow Russian to be used freely. We should allow Russian speakers to retain their identity and to have freedom of choice. People believe that all Ukrainian citizens should know Ukrainian language. The state should be using primarily Ukrainian. The state should be protecting and developing primarily Ukrainian. There is clear evidence of that in survey data, but citizens should be free. And citizens should be free in their private life, but if they happen to be state employees or service providers, they should be obliged to use Ukrainian service in Ukrainian-speaking consumers. Yeah, so it's a complicated dynamics. Definitely, it's not comparable to England and the US. Definitely, Russia is aggressively pressuring Ukraine, and Russia is killing Ukrainians. So the very fact that Russia continues to be killing Ukrainian is enough for many people not to want to use Russian. I happen to be one of such people. I only use Russian for my scholarly purposes. Yeah, when it is important not to interfere with your language choice in the situation you are studying. But as an individual, as a citizen, I do not use Russian. I do not want to contribute to this persistence of Russian, but I must take into account that many of my fellow citizens believe and behave otherwise. So, and they are as legitimate citizens and have as I am, and they have no less right to demand policies that takes into account their language preferences than I do. Yeah, so that's complicated, but I believe that in a few words to summarize what I just said, people want the state to introduce more Ukrainian, to promote Ukrainian, to require Ukrainian in some domains, but people do not want the state to impose Ukrainian, especially in private life, beyond the state sector. And they do not want the state to strip them of their choice of languages, of their right to choose the language. Yeah, so people want, it's complicated. People want the state to promote Ukrainian without limiting their freedom of choice. Easier said than done, of course.
Thank you, Volodymyr. May I ask you again to stop sharing the screen? We have 2 more questions. So the next question will be from Natalia Kudryavtseva. Nice to hear from you, Natalia. Thank you very much for this informative talk. In your opinion, if the international persistence of Russian were to decrease in any future, would it be due to the growth of national languages, such as Ukrainian, or to the further spread of English?
I believe the latter. Definitely, it's much easier for English to defeat Russian than for Ukrainian or Belarusian or Kazakh, yeah, or Latvian for that matter. All these other languages of the former Soviet Union are either much less widespread than Russian, or have the states which are much poorer than Russia, much smaller than Russia, or due to internal ethnic and linguistic dynamics are hesitant to use aggressive policies to curb the influence, the use and prevalence of Russian. In contrast, English doesn't discriminate. It goes everywhere and applies to all states almost equally, except it comes where people can learn it, where people are ready to use it. And definitely the former Soviet Union is still a not very beneficial part of the world for English, but it is changing. Younger people learn English more, use it in their entertainment, when they listen to songs, when they watch movies, when they travel, when they do programming, write code, or work in some international companies and so on. So this will be changing. Russian still has a great advantage over English as a language much better known by the majority of the population, including younger people. But that might be changing. Look at former socialist countries where Russian used to be taught for decades, and where Russian all but disappeared, and English is much better known than Russian, and much better known than in the former Soviet Union, where precisely the knowledge of Russian is a kind of a detrimental factor for the active use of English. Yeah, because people have a choice. If they go beyond the limits and resources of their national languages, they can rely on Russian instead of directly on English. Yeah. So, but again, we see the Baltics, which are making efforts, Baltic states, which are making greater efforts to introduce, to encourage the use of English, and they are succeeding in that, even though Russian still is better known there than English, especially in Latvia, maybe not so much in Estonia. So that is changing, but changing slowly. So the salvation for those who believe Russian is evil or obstacle or whatever, salvation will come from English. But we definitely do not want English to be the only game in town. We want to protect our national languages as well, and English will, in a way, help us by limiting the hegemony of Russian. But language doesn't want to help us for our own sake, for our own good. It wants to help us for their own dominance. Yeah, and it will come sooner or later. But I prefer later.
Mm-hmm. A question from Zoriana. Why does the globalization effect preferred Russian use doesn't have such a big impact on the native language use in Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia compared to Ukraine?
I believe it does. Maybe not so much. First, there is a more clear divide between titulars and Russians in non-Slavic republics. So Ukraine and Belarus are exceptional because so many ethnic Ukrainians and ethnic Belarusians prefer Russian as in everyday life. Yeah, so rather few Latvians or Estonians, or very few Lithuanians. Yeah, so there is a more clear divide. So Russian is used by Russians in those republics, while in Ukraine, Russian is also used by very many locals. Second, of course, these republics pursued more aggressive policies of support and promotion and imposition of the titular languages because they could. Latvia and Estonia stripped Soviet migrants, most of them were Russian speakers, of citizenship. They didn't grant them automatic citizenship because they argued that they are not establishing new states, but restoring the states that existed before Soviet occupation in 1940. Because of that, they had much more freedom to pursue more aggressive language policies, which Ukraine could not afford until, paradoxically, until the war. But even now, a very high percentage of Russian speakers and a very high percentage of people critical of Ukrainization and critical of or even of Westernization and critical of all Ukrainian nationalism as a Soviet, I mean, not as a real nationalism, but as a Soviet myth, as a Soviet ideological construct. This is still a limit on what the state can do, and there is much less limit in the Baltic states. Having said that, they still have a problem. Russians or Russian speakers there are not assimilating or emigrating. They are there to stay. When titular elites started these aggressive policies, they believed that the titular policies will be one factor which will phase Russians away. It didn't happen. They are there, and they insist on their rights, and they slowly learning the titular languages, but continue using their own language among themselves and in everyday life, and that creates incentives even for titulars to service them in their language. And that's why yesterday, it was yesterday that I read on a news on Ukrainska Pravda website that Russian minister, I don't remember which minister, said that he would promote more aggressive policies of Latvianization, and he found it outrageous that many employers require the knowledge of Russian of their applicants, for potential employees. So why is that? Because there is a large sector of the market of Russian-speaking population and customers from Russia for tourism or international trade or whatever. So Russian is still needed there. So even those states which could pursue more aggressive policies are constrained in how much they can eliminate and marginalize Russian.
A question from Miroslava Znayenko. What inroads are made by English and of course Ukrainian to add or replace Russian in advertising, popularizing globally national Ukrainian sports organizations?
If we are talking about domestic advertisement, it's clear there is law requiring 100% Ukrainian. So advertisement was one of the first domains, maybe the second one after education, where Ukrainian was introduced fastly and kind of massively, and now it's complete predominance of Ukrainian. There are some pockets like private ads can be placed in whatever language. There are some practices where Russian is still used, but it's mostly Ukrainian. If Miroslava is asking about advertisement of Ukraine internationally, definitely it is primarily in English, or other languages of the respective states where advertising is made, and Russian is not used for that purposes.
Yeah, I'm sorry, and Miroslava Znayenko also put a comment a little bit below. Sorry, my question above has already been mostly answered by the speaker, but I wonder about conscious efforts that are being made to replace Russian with English and or Ukrainian. So that was her comment.
I'm not sure what practice she means. Let me check her comments above. There is global national Ukrainian sports organization. Again, there is official policy, and there is kind of informal practices. On the one hand, the state increasingly eliminates Russian as a language in which Ukraine is advertised anywhere. I mean, internationally. So it's either English or Ukrainian. But there is no going around the fact that most Ukrainian sports people continue using Russian, and that's the fact which is visible internationally. So if they are, of course they're now trying to use more English in press conferences or communication with journalism or whatever. Other than that, they're more likely than not to prefer Russian because they are young urbanites, So some of them are from the east, but even if they are from Kyiv or other big cities in the center, so they might be more comfortable with Russian. And of course, that depends on the policies of their coaches and their team leaders. As far as I understand, they are not really pressured to use either Ukrainian or English internationally. So very often I hear them speak Russian on TV, which is, in my view, inappropriate, especially if it's state TV. That can be expected. The state is paying them huge money for their training, for their travels, and then expect them. The state invest in their social capital, in their fame, yeah, and then expect them not only bring results, but bring this kind of messages to Ukrainian and global audiences. So I believe that it would be appropriate for the sports officials to insist that sportsmen and women use primarily English or Ukrainian when talking to the media, and use primarily English when talking internationally.
Miroslava says, I follow tennis. The tennis sports organization is still strict in Russian.
Yeah, that's what I saw. I follow biathlon, and I see that, and I don't like that at all.
And we have a question from Jeff Holdman. Is it common for Ukrainians to correct other Ukrainians' mistakes in Ukrainian, mistakes due to the influence of Russian, when the mistakes are due to the influence of Russian?
Oh, absolutely. My colleague Lada Bilanyuk from the University of Washington wrote a great book, Contested Tongues, and it was exactly about this policies of language correction. Ukrainians are not different from others in their preference for correct language, yeah, and especially for newly widespread, newly established languages such as Ukrainian, there is not much kind of agreement on what correct language is. People have their own ideas, and these ideas collide, and people are eager to correct one another. I mean, not necessarily start correcting every day in every communicative act, but very often. You can see that on the social media. You can sometimes hear that even in private communication. Of course, there is another kind of belief that it is not polite to teach anybody how to speak and how to live, yeah? But people are so adamant, many people are so adamant about correct language that they believe they should be helping others to speak better Ukrainian. And they are more eager to teach somebody good Ukrainian than more eager to teach good Ukrainian than to teach good Russian. Even those who actually know better how to speak Russian than how to speak Ukrainian, but still they are more eager to teach Ukrainian, precisely because Ukrainian is new. And there is less agreement on what the norm is, yeah? But also because Ukrainian is more dear to them. They care more about Ukrainian. They consider Ukrainian beautiful. They do not want Ukrainian to be spoiled by bad practice. Yeah, that's complex dynamics, but definitely there is a lot of that, and no better place to see that, to follow that than social media. So many people try to correct somebody's bad Ukrainian, and the latest manifestation of that, the Ukrainian government introduced a new orthography, not very new, with some corrections, and some people are indignant about that orthography. They believe that it is flawed. It doesn't represent how people speak, or it doesn't represent historical tradition, or it doesn't represent Ukraine's declared intention to go to Europe or whatever. Yeah, so it's not good for them, and they try to correct. They try to argue with the state, even not just with other people using that. For example, transliteration of H from English as ironically, many people making those comments are Russian speakers. And I recently asked, why the hell should they be teaching us how to speak our Ukrainian? But the answer is obvious, because they care about Ukrainian, because the Ukrainian is a state language, because as a state language, it belongs to all its citizens, not just to those for whom it's the first language learned as a child. Yeah, so we are stuck with that, and these debates will continue.
Well, thank you so much, Volodymyr. Thank you so much for your generosity for staying with us and for generously asking all the questions. But I will allow myself to ask one more question before we will let you go. So we were talking about how post-Soviet countries were responding to some language policy challenges, so to speak. On the other hand, there is also this question about Russia and how Russia positions itself in terms of language policies. Unfortunately, Russian in Ukraine is not just a language for communication or of communication. It always comes with some legacy, either Soviet legacy or Russian, Imperial Russia legacy as well. And right now, the Russian language is also sold as a part of the Russian world. And by some understanding, it is if you speak Russian, so you can be part of the Russian world. And all these, if we can put it this way, language battles are somehow connected to this official policy, which is aggressively promoted by Russia, where Russian is turned into a very powerful ideological and political instrument. So just maybe could you share your thoughts on how Russia positions itself in terms of language policies and how these countries can respond to the involvement of the Russian language into the project of the Russian world? And again, the reason I'm asking is that, well, we can have textbooks on Russian in Ukraine, and they will be organized in some certain way. But there are also textbooks on the Russian language abroad. And unfortunately, in this context, the Russian language is presented only as the language of Russia. And that's how students are educated, where they associate the Russian language exclusively with the Russian Federation today, or with the Soviet Union, which also they know as Russia. So one of the examples can be where the Russian textbooks, specifically in the United States, would mention cities like Kyiv or places like Crimea without any identification that those places do not belong to the Russian territory.
I mean, if Americans or German or Japanese want to use such textbooks, that's their problem. Not, I mean, that's bad education. Yeah, so that's flawed approach, obviously. Yeah, so they should be corrected by students, by other teachers, by concerned persons. Yeah, who happen to know about that. I mean, if Ukrainian authorities or Ukrainian individuals come near such situations, they can interfere. But basically, you cannot correct everybody in the world. Yeah, so this limited knowledge can be corrected gradually when it becomes kind of unacceptable, shameful to be so poorly informed. Yeah, so that's a general approach to all such flaws. But if we look at the more general problem of who does Russian language belong to, there is one obvious answer. It belongs to everybody speaking it. Yeah. So and definitely these people, as I just explained, live not only in Russia. Yeah. They live in Ukraine. They live in Belarus. They live in Kazakhstan and even in the Baltics. Yeah. But definitely the norms of the language are created and policed, guarded primarily in Russia. So that's why I do not believe that it is feasible to establish a separate Ukrainian variety of Russian, nor does it believe that it is beneficial to Ukraine to do so, because as long as the Russian language will be still primarily used and standardized and policed by Russia, it will still be available for Russia as a means of propaganda, as a means of weapon against Ukraine. Yeah, so I believe that on the one hand, of course, Ukraine should be a democratic state, granting its citizens the right to language rights and the freedom of choice. But on the other hand, its policy should be not introducing a separate Ukrainian variety of the Russian language, but rather gradually marginalizing or at least diminishing the presence of Russian in favor of Ukrainian and English. So as long as Russia remains such an aggressive power, using the widespread knowledge and availability of its language to the purposes of its propaganda, as the purpose of its war, there is no sense or no benefit in establishing a separate variety of Russian. But this idea, it remains popular. Everybody says, look how many varieties of English there are, how many varieties of German, yeah, of Spanish, yeah, definitely. But as that person told you, it's not whoever the word hierarchy it was that Russia is not England. Yeah, Russia behaves differently. So we should not draw conclusions kind of automatically based on foreign experience. So in my view, unfortunately, the Russian language mostly belongs to Russia. And it is so perceived internationally, and it is so affecting politics of language use and language acquisition. And if people are using, if people are teaching Russian language in Western universities, it's mostly for the purpose of dealing with Russia. And for the purpose of dealing with Ukraine, they should learn Ukrainian. And of course, Ukrainians should better learn English, so English could also be used for those purposes.
Just to make it more clear for our audiences, this comment on the Ukrainian variant of Russian stirred a lot of turmoil in Ukraine a couple of days ago when I believe Press Secretary Mendel, right, she made a comment that it should be Russian Ukrainian in Ukraine, or we should somehow claim our rights for the Russian language as well. And this conversation stirred a lot of political turmoil, and there were a lot of critical and negative responses to that idea.
Yeah. This idea re-emerges from time to time. A couple of years ago, in an interview with Natalia Homenuk for Hromadske TV, the great historian, American historian of Eastern Europe, Timothy Snyder, raised that idea and supported it. I respect Tim very much. He's a good friend of mine, actually, but I disagree with that. I believe that, like I said, it would do more harm than good, because the more entrenched Russia becomes in Ukraine, the more available Russian becomes in Ukraine, the more available it will be to Russia for its propaganda purposes, for its war against Ukraine. So we should not do that.
Well, thank you so much, Volodymyr. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us and for sharing your expertise. And I really appreciate your generosity of staying with us and addressing all the questions. And I do hope that I didn't miss any questions which were left in the chat or in the Q&A box. Thank you so much, Volodymyr.
Thank you, Natalia. Thank you to everybody for listening and for asking questions. It was a great opportunity. Stay tuned.
Today we spoke with Dr. Volodymyr Kulyk, who presented on globalization and the persistence of Russian in the post-Soviet realm, Ukraine in a comparative perspective. Thank you for attending our lecture. Information about upcoming events will be posted on the UkrSO listserv and on our Facebook page, Ukrainian Studies Organization at Indiana University. You can view previous lectures and talks on our YouTube channel. For future recorded events, please subscribe to our channel. Again, thank you so much for joining us today.